welcome to a special edition of Other Voices Online, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. Since so many of you are likely new to the Peace and Justice Center and Other Voices, I'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. PPJC is a community-based activist organization in Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Peninsula. We've been one of the area's leading activist organizations for 41 years. We've been producing Other Voices, which we describe as a monthly conversation for activists, for 27 years, first as a TV program, and since the pandemic, as a Zoom webinar. And tonight certainly marks the largest audience ever recorded for Other Voices. So thank you very much for being here, everyone. I don't think I really need to introduce my guest tonight because I suspect Joel Beinin is the reason you're here. But just to make it official, Joel Beinin is the Donald J. McLachlan Professor of History and Professor of Middle East History Emeritus, Stanford University. He has written or edited 12 books with a focus on the social and cultural history and political economy of modern Egypt, Palestine, and Israel, and on U.S. policy in the Middle East. He also was my very first guest on Other Voices 27 years ago, and has since been our most frequent returning guest. Welcome to Other Voices once again, Joel Beinin.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's always good to be with you.
Well, I wish we could get together under better circumstances, but it seems like when you're on this program, it's because some disaster has just happened. And we certainly have one this time. Over 1,400 Israelis murdered in what can only be called an atrocity. Some 200 Israeli citizens taken hostage. The response so far by the Israeli Defense Forces has killed over 3,000 Palestinians and displaced hundreds of thousands more. Israeli Air Force bombings have already destroyed an estimated 11,000 buildings in Gaza, leaving nearly 100,000 Palestinians with no homes to return to, even if the violence ended tomorrow. An apparent all-out Israeli invasion is looming on the horizon. What was Hamas thinking? Why now? What are your initial thoughts with what we've seen in the last couple of weeks?
So let's begin by trying to understand, as you asked, what was Hamas thinking? The heinous as their acts on October 7th were, they aren't simply a bunch of irrational lunatics. The situation on the ground in the Gaza Strip was declared unlivable as of 2020 by the United Nations and various international aid organizations. 96% of the local water aquifers product is unpotable. 74% of all of the youth are unemployed, and nearly 50% of the entire working population is unemployed. There are shortages of everything. And of course, since October 7th, Israel has put a total shutdown on water, food, electricity, fuel, and so on. So absolutely unlivable conditions. In addition, there has been no progress whatsoever towards any kind of a resolution of the conflict between the Palestinian people and the state of Israel. The Palestinian Authority, which rules in the West Bank, is corrupt and totally collaborationist with the state of Israel, especially under the new government that was elected nearly a year ago in Israel. There have been repeated assaults on the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, which in the Jewish tradition is the Temple Mount. Jews, militant Orthodox Messianist Jews have been going up there to pray, and even at one point tried to conduct an animal sacrifice. So the Palestinian people have been besieged on all sides, and no peaceful effort to resist has been acceptable by Israel and its supporters. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is demonized. Pro-Palestinian speech on American university campuses is demonized as anti-Semitism. The Great March of Return, which began as a peaceful movement of people who were not aligned with either Hamas or Fatah in 2018, 2019. Eventually, Hamas managed to seize control over it. But nonetheless, this began as a peaceful effort. That was rejected by Israel, which killed and maimed hundreds of Palestinians. So there was nothing that the Palestinians could do. What did the Hamas attack of October 7th accomplish? It moved things off dead center. It gave a sense of initiative and agency to the Palestinian people. In my judgment, this will utterly fail and not contribute to the liberation of a single Palestinian. But that, I think, was the logic behind it.
Thank you. In our email exchanges setting this up, you said quite rightly so that there's no way you could go into the full history of the occupation. It's been going on for decades. But I would like to talk briefly anyway about more recent history. And I'll refer to an article that struck me in Haaretz recently by Dmitry Shumsky. He's reporting between 2012 and 2018, Netanyahu gave Qatar approval to transfer a cumulative sum of about $1 billion to Gaza, at least half of which reached Hamas, including its military wing. And then he quotes something that Netanyahu told his cabinet back in 2019, as reported by a former cabinet member. Quoting Netanyahu, "The money transfer is part of the strategy to divide the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Anyone who opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state needs to support the transfer of the money from Qatar to Hamas. In that way, we will foil the establishment of a Palestinian state." End quote. That's pretty shocking stuff. It's been clear that Netanyahu has been trying to play off the divisions within the Palestinians precisely to avoid any kind of serious negotiations that would result in even basic human rights for the Palestinians. Is this report correct?
Yes, I believe it is. I didn't know the details about the exact sum of money, but writ large, yes, it's correct. And I believe that the transfer of money from Qatar to the Gaza Strip only ended several months ago. So it continued, I think, after 2018. And people who have watched these things closely in Israel have long said that there is a tacit alliance between Netanyahu and Hamas in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And this is Netanyahu in particular is very devious and skilled at playing one side off against the other, not only in Palestinian politics, but also in internal Israeli politics. It's very consistent with his style. But more broadly, most Israeli governments have preferred to deal with armed Palestinian elements that commit acts of terror, because then they can appear both in front of the Israeli people and the international community and say, see, while we have barbarians that are confronting us, there's no way you can really expect us to talk with them and to deal with them. They only understand force, so let it rip. And that is, in fact, what has been going on, notably in the Gaza Strip, since 2008, when Israel first assaulted the Gaza Strip.
So how widely known or understood is this kind of behind the scenes double dealing on the part of Netanyahu? How widely known is that in Israel and among the electorate?
It's pretty well known in Israel if you read the newspaper. I mean, you quote Dmitry Shumsky writing in Haaretz.
Right.
I've read similar things in Haaretz for several years now. It's not a state secret. There was an agreement reached to enable this. And there was quite a lot of discussion about it after May 2021, which was the last time that there was an escalation of violence between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, at the same time as there was an escalation of violence in the West Bank and tensions over Israeli incursions into the noble sanctuary, the Temple Mount. So, yeah, I mean, if people have been paying attention, this should not have been news to them.
And well, how does it sit with people that they know that Netanyahu was essentially financing Hamas, and now they're confronted with this horrific attack? I noted reports about a number of cabinet ministers going to visit hospitals and things like that, and getting booed and chased off the scene. Is Netanyahu in politically perilous territory at this point?
People are saying that he's done, that after the war, the government will fall sooner or later, and that unless he pulls off some magic trick, which he's been known to do, he's done in Israeli politics. Now, I would take all of that with a certain note of caution. Just as President Trump said that he could murder someone in the streets of New York and his followers would still remain loyal to him, Netanyahu has a fiercely loyal following. 20-25% of the Israeli public, somewhere in that zone. And for them, he can do no wrong. So they, if they pay attention at all, some of them aren't all that careful about following current events, but if they pay attention at all, well, this makes sense, doesn't it? We do want at least de facto to annex the West Bank, if some of Netanyahu supporters want de jure annexation. We do want to split the Palestinian Authority from the governing authority in the Gaza Strip. And so Hamas hasn't, in fact, posed any kind of existential threat to Israel. Even this last attack, heinous as it was hardly an existential threat.
Right.
It was unnerving. It overturned all of Israel's assumptions about Hamas, but it was not an existential threat. So the Netanyahu strategy looked like it was working until October 7th, and then it wasn't working anymore.
And part of the criticism out there is that, speaking of the West Bank and wanting to annex it, basically since Netanyahu's recent election, he's been vastly increasing settlement building there, has moved a lot of troops to the West Bank. And in fact, one of the criticisms is that there weren't enough troops on the border of Gaza because they had been moved to the West Bank to support this increased settlement quasi-annexation scheme.
Yes, that's true. The extreme right-wing messianic settlers, I think it's fair to call some of them fascists, people who have been committing pogroms in West Bank villages, who have been forcibly evicting Palestinian shepherds from their lands and homes. They have been upping the ante in order to force their program, which is Israeli annexation of the West Bank. And an entire brigade of the Israeli army was moved from the area around the Gaza Strip to the West Bank to protect the settlers during the Israeli holiday of Sukkot. I should say Jewish holiday. We celebrate it here too in the United States. Because during Sukkot is when you're supposed to do an animal sacrifice in the temple times. Jews haven't done that for 2,000 years, but these folks think that it's time to start renewing that tradition. So there was lots of fear that the settlers, these particular settlers especially, would undertake provocative acts, and then the army would have to protect them, because the army protects the settlers, not the Palestinians. So people are outraged over that. There is more hatred against the settlements among Israeli Jews now than there ever has been before. And that's particularly amplified by the fact that most of the population centers that were attacked on October 7th were kibbutzim. That means that in Israeli terms, they are left-leaning. They don't vote for the Likud and for the parties of the right by and large. There were two development towns, as they're called, which do vote for the Likud and the parties of the right. But even their inhabitants are outraged against Netanyahu and the government.
Since you mentioned that, I came across statistic in all the reading I've been doing on this, that in the last election, actually the kibbutzim in that area that was so brutally attacked voted 90% for parties that call for or are open to a two-state solution. That's the point you were just trying to make, I think.
Yeah, I didn't know the number, but that sounds right.
Yeah, I wrote it down because I thought that was pretty striking. So speaking of the people from those kibbutzes that are right near Gaza, they are mostly the ones who have ended up as the hostages. And I do want to ask you about the hostage situation. I know this affects you personally. Do you want to mention?
Sure. So my niece and her husband and their three kids, they're grown now, 18, 20, 22, all live on kibbutz near Oz, which is one of the kibbutzim that is closest to the border with the Gaza Strip. I mean, it's just a long stone's throw away. And it was one of the first sites that was attacked. And the Hamas people carried out a devastating massacre there. There were about 385 kibbutz residents. Only 200 of them survived. Somewhere in the range of 75, 80 are thought to be hostages, among them my niece and her husband. Their three children are safe. There was a funeral there today that was covered on CNN. Many children were murdered, old people, children, and elderly people were taken hostage. It was totally devastating. I know the most details about that because of my family connection, but equally in Kibbutz Be'eri and Kfar Aza and Nachal Oz, there were also absolutely horrific and devastating scenes.
Well, I am so sorry that your family members have gotten involved in, caught up in this tragic situation, and it can't be easy for all of you other family members with no information coming in. So thank you again in light of that for joining us tonight. One of the things I read was that a number of family members of hostages have taken up a kind of a silent, quiet protest in front of military headquarters, calling on the government not to go ahead with some kind of incursion or invasion into the Gaza Strip itself until the hostages have been freed. Is that right? Is that demonstration still going on?
That is right. It is, as far as I know, still going on. The families of the hostages are very, very upset with the Israeli government on several different levels. First, because they didn't even have any communication with any official governmental authority for days. Second, because the hostages simply haven't been a priority of the government. I mean, if you are doing a massive bombing of the Gaza Strip, then the likelihood is that you're going to kill some of the hostages. Hamas has announced that 17 of the hostages have been killed by Israeli bombing. I don't know that we should believe them, but neither is that ridiculous on the face of it. I don't think the hostage question became prominent for the Israeli government until the visits of Secretary of State Blinken, and President Biden. Now, my niece is an American citizen because she's the daughter of my brother who was born in the United States. So the Americans have gotten involved in the cases of dual Israeli-American citizens. So my sister met with Secretary of State Blinken. My brother was on a Zoom call with President Biden. And they say that the American authorities have been very empathic and very forthcoming. If you heard President Biden's speech just a short while ago, that was about the only thing that he said that was worth anything. But empathy is great, and President Biden is in fact pretty good at that. But I don't know operationally what the Americans can do, especially since there's no sign from the Israeli authorities that they actually are making recovery of the hostages a high priority.
What is the thinking about what Hamas might be planning to use the hostages for? It obviously to trade for something, but what are you hearing or reading on why they have the hostages? And the other thing I wanted to ask, I don't remember this happening before. Is this a new tactic?
There have been hostages held by Hamas in the past. A soldier, Gilad Shalit, was held for 5 years, and then
of course,
for a large number of Palestinian prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, who is the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip today, and several others who became prominent military commanders. There are 2 other Israelis whose names I don't remember, who are believed to be held by Hamas for quite a while. This is by far the largest number of hostages that any Palestinian or Arab armed organization has held. And it's the first time that civilians have been held hostage, which is, of course, a violation of the Geneva Conventions and of international law. There are army people among the hostages. I don't know that we know exactly how many of these and how many of those. Everything that I have seen about what Hamas thought they were doing about taking the hostages is speculative. My sense is that Hamas's objective was to sow as much death, destruction, and demoralization among Israelis as they possibly could. And they certainly did sow a lot of death and destruction, but they didn't understand, I think, that despite the fact that Israeli society was bitterly and deeply divided over the 9 months preceding the October 7th, that this brought them together. Israelis are almost uniformly united behind the government in pursuing military action against the Gaza Strip. So at some point, we can imagine that whatever hostages survive will be offered in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. It may also be that Hamas will try to achieve some easing of conditions in the Gaza Strip. But Israel's objective is to eliminate Hamas as an organization. It won't be able to eliminate Hamas as an ideology. That's impossible through military means. But Israel may very well be able to, if not utterly eliminate Hamas, render it incapable of functioning as an organization. And then who knows what will happen with the hostages, if any are surviving at that point.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the possibility of, or what seems like a high probability of, a full invasion of Gaza by the Israeli Defense Forces to, as you note, the word they're using is eliminate Hamas. When Biden was there and met with the Israeli cabinet, Benny Gantz, who's just recently been appointed to a so-called unity cabinet, told President Biden that it will take years to eliminate Hamas. Is that what we're looking at? Is a years-long reoccupation of Gaza by Israel? They pulled out in, was it 2005, and did the separation and isolation, or containment and separation, I think was the name of the policy.
So I don't imagine that the Israeli armed forces are going to be engaged in the Gaza Strip for years. Israel has mobilized 360,000 reserve soldiers. That's a huge burden on the Israeli economy that can't be sustained for more than a limited amount of time.
We should make clear that these are people who have jobs in the economy and are reserves, quite literally. And so we have 360,000 people who are not working at their jobs in Israel right now.
Exactly. Israel does not want to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. There was a good reason why they got out in 2005, because it took an enormous toll on the resources of the military establishment. Then there were some 6,000 or so settlers in the Gaza Strip, and they all had to be protected, of course. Now that will never happen again, but nonetheless, a reoccupation would be a major military burden on Israel. So I don't know that Israel has any more a viable plan for what to do with the Gaza Strip than Hamas has at this point. Neither party has offered an outlook that seems viable to me. So we are definitely not going back to what was before. The terms of the game have been changed. It's too soon to know exactly in what direction and what scenarios are possible to imagine.
Let's turn now to our audience members and bring them in for your for their questions. And because there are so many attendees tonight, we're going to take written questions only to try to get through as many questions as we can this evening. So just click on that Q&A icon you see at the bottom of your screen and type out your question, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can this evening. I'm pretty sure we're not going to get through all of them, but we do get all the questions that are put into the queue are available to us after the webinar, and we will try to get answers for you afterwards. So let's start with David Lealy is asking, why won't Egypt let American citizens leave Gaza through the Rafah gate? Well, I think it's Hamas who's not letting them leave right now, but
yeah, I mean, all the parties are playing a little dance here. I mean, first of all, Israel, the Rafah gate has an Egyptian component and a Palestinian component. Early on in its military operations, Israel bombed the road between the two of them. So nobody can get in or out right now until they get some bulldozers and other road repair equipment in there to make it travelable. Egypt is worried that any significant movement of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip into Egypt is going to open the door and Egypt will be inundated with Palestinians. They don't want any Palestinians in Egypt, and they're especially nervous that some of those Palestinians may be Hamas supporters. Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brothers. The Muslim Brothers are the principal opponent of the regime of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. He has murdered and imprisoned thousands of them. So there's that. Hamas actually doesn't want to let anybody leave for something of the flip reason. They don't want Palestinians to leave the country. They want Palestinians to stay in the country. The United States would like to get the several hundred Gazans who are dual citizens. Actually, if you live in Gaza, you don't have any citizenship because there is no such thing as Palestinian citizenship. I mean, the Palestinian passport isn't worth very much. So people who have American citizenship, the United States would like to get them out of there. The United States would also like to get hostages who are American citizens out of there. Israel might not mind that, but they're not letting it get in the way of their military plan. So everybody is speaking out of several different sides of their mouth and expressing concern for the hostages, but not doing what's necessary to get them out. And similarly for American citizens among the residents of the Gaza Strip.
While we're on the topic of the Rafah Gate, what is the status of the humanitarian aid getting in that President Biden was able to negotiate with the Israelis? How long will that take to actually get some food and water and medicine and fuel in there?
I think that's an unknown. President Biden was perhaps a little gullible in believing the Israelis when they said, yes, they would let this happen. The Israelis have also said that they won't let it happen until Hamas releases the hostages. Hamas says they won't release the hostages until Israel stops bombing. So we have a little standoff there. Egypt says that it has hundreds of trucks laden with supplies ready to go. The deal was apparently to let 20 trucks in. Okay, Israel has cut off food, water, electricity, fuel, and all other goods coming into the Gaza Strip since October 8th. 20 trucks worth of supplies is a drop in the bucket, especially when about 1 million people have now been pushed out of the northern Gaza Strip at Israel's order into the southern Gaza Strip, where there are not facilities to house them or otherwise care for them. There's a humanitarian catastrophe going on. And if you just drive 20 trucks into a scene like that with no guarantee that there's going to be an ongoing supply of food and water and medicine and so on, you could have a riot. No one seems to be thinking very carefully about the best way to actually take care of these people whose plight is 100% Israel's fault at this point.
And just a reminder, we are talking about 2 million people who live in Gaza, and almost half of them are children. Do I have those statistics right? Okay, another audience question here. There were claims of Israel having intelligence about the Hamas attack on October 7th. Is that just a conspiracy theory, or is there any real evidence of that?
So here again, people are talking out of both sides of their mouths. In English, the Egyptian intelligence authorities said that they warned Israel over a period of time that something big is going to happen. They didn't specify what it was. Apparently, Hamas's security around it was quite good. Israel at first said, no, we didn't do any such thing. Then when that argument became public, Egypt said in Arabic, no, we didn't do that, because doing that would be extremely unpopular in Egypt.
In Egypt, yes.
So did they warn the Israelis? or did they not? Odds are good that they said something. I mean, this is speculative. Odds are good that they said something, but they may not have known enough to convince the Israelis, especially because the Israelis were very locked into a mindset in which they simply didn't imagine that Hamas had the capacity to do what it did.
It sure did take them by surprise. Michael Wolf asks, Joel, do you think Hamas timed its attack to disrupt the Israeli-Saudi peace negotiations? Do you think if Israel invades Gaza, which will likely increase Palestinian civilian deaths to 10,000 or more, Saudi Arabia will go through with such a deal?
So it's possible that the precise timing was indeed linked to an effort to derail the Saudi-Israeli rapprochement. But this has been, according to all the experts who know about such things, in the planning stages for as much as a year or more. So, maybe they decided to do it now for that reason. Maybe they decided to do it now because the Israeli army pulled a brigade away from the Gaza area and put it in the northern West Bank. We just don't know for sure. It's worth emphasizing, though, that the Saudi, the effort to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel is a little bit of a straw man, because Israel and Saudi Arabia have had quite good relations unofficially for some time now. The Israeli cyber security firm NSO gave Saudi Arabia, more likely sold to Saudi Arabia, its Pegasus software, which the Saudis installed on the cell phone of the fiancé of Jamal Khashoggi, who the Saudis murdered and decapitated in their embassy in Istanbul. So there has been a very high level of security and intelligence collaboration between Israel and the Saudis without there being formal diplomatic relations. The Saudis said, while the Biden administration was promoting this idea, that we're willing to establish relations with Israel, but they have to establish a Palestinian state, have to agree to establish a Palestinian state. Well, that was certainly never going to happen, not with this government and not with any government that one can imagine coming into office in Israel. So was there any real possibility that Saudi Arabia and Egypt were going to normalize relations? Maybe the Saudis would have settled for some fig leaf that the Israelis would have offered. But I think internally, the uber right wingers, I mean, the people who openly call themselves fascist homophobes in the Israeli cabinet, would not have agreed even to a fig leaf with Saudi Arabia because they want to annex the West Bank. That's it. And they don't want anything to get in the way. So was there actually a good chance of any kind of a Saudi-Israeli normalization of relations? I tend to think it was way oversold over the actual possibilities of such a thing. And of course, it's not going to be happening anytime soon now.
Certainly not. Okay, another question from the audience. How likely is it that this will become a larger conflict with perhaps Hezbollah and Iran involved?
I don't think we can know the answer to that yet. Earlier today, if we believe American sources, always to be taken with some caution, the Houthis in Yemen, who are supported by Iran, that's a very complicated story on the margin of this main story, so we won't.
Yes.
But the Houthis shot some missiles in the direction of Israel, and they were intercepted and shot down by anti-missile missiles from American naval operations in the Persian Gulf area. So I don't, first of all, know even if that's 100% true. That's what was reported in the news on several sources that I read. And we certainly don't know if Iran actually directed the Houthis to do that. Now, if they did, then we might be on the verge of a conflagration. But if the Houthis just got excited, because there have been massive demonstrations in many cities around the Arab world, especially after the bombing of the hospital, which whoever did it, everybody in the Arab world believes that Israel did it. Hamas won the battle of narratives on that, whatever the truth of the matter ends up being. So people are outraged, and maybe they just got trigger happy because of that.
It seems that Hezbollah is kind of doing the minimum to symbolize support for Palestinians, but not. They are really heavily armed these days. I mean, just tens of thousands of missiles and rockets. What do you make of their kind of toe in the water involvement so far?
So I think, first of all, that is an indication that Iran doesn't want a major escalation, because Hezbollah is the force in the Arab region which is most directly and closely linked to the Iranian regime. I mean, they basically set it up after Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. But Hezbollah, in addition to the broad pressure of feeling compelled to express support for the Palestinian cause, is under domestic Lebanese pressure. There were big demonstrations in Beirut after the bombing of the hospital demanding that Hezbollah get involved. So Hezbollah is a party in the pretty non-functional Lebanese government, but they are a major player in Lebanese domestic politics, because they are the biggest representative of the Shia community, which is the largest the plurality among the Lebanese population. So it might come to pass that because of internal Lebanese political considerations, that Hezbollah will be forced to do more than they might otherwise have wanted to do. That's an unknown at this point.
Okay, here's another one. What are the prospects for a new coalition government in Israel in the near future? Netanyahu moved quickly to kind of make a unity government by appointing a couple of new ministers. Are there any more shakeups possible given the turmoil and the political situation in Israel?
So again, we won't be able to know exactly what the possibilities are there until after either the fighting stops or at least it's brought down to a simmer. The most popular political figure in Israel today is Benny Gantz, former chief of staff and head of a government party whose name is very difficult to translate into English. It's in Hebrew Mamlachtiyut, and in English governmentalism. So I think it's often translated in ways that don't actually have anything to do with what it means. It means a certain approach to the government as the center of gravity. His popularity shot up during the 9 months of the weekly demonstrations against the assault on the independence of the judiciary that the Netanyahu government was undertaking before October 7th. The other person who was brought in with him is also former chief of staff, Gadi Eisenkot. He's less of a popular political figure, but bringing them in was necessary because Netanyahu doesn't have prominent figures in his party or among his loyalists who have high-level professional military experience. These guys, getting from Eisenkot, have already assaulted the Gaza Strip one or more times, so they're pros at this. They know how to do that particular activity. The official leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, who heads the There Is a Future party, has not agreed to join the government. And there's been a lot of debate over whether this is a clever thing for him to have done or not. He said, look, Netanyahu isn't going to listen to us. He wants these guys in there, and me too. He was invited in, and he said no, because he needs a fig leaf, because the country doesn't trust him after the security and intelligence failure on October 7th. He's lost credibility. He's lost popularity. He's just going to use us to build himself up and conduct this war the way he wants to conduct it. He's not going to actually take our advice. That's probably true. That probably will be the case, except for very narrow military professional issues in which Gantz and Eisenkot's opinions will matter because the generals respect them. Now, what does all that translate to in a post-war situation? Well, in all likelihood, the government will not survive the remaining 3 years that are in its term. In all likelihood, there will be early elections at some point after the war is over. There will be a commission of inquiry. How serious the inquiry will be and how independent of the current government it will be, we don't know. If it's not seen to be independent and serious, there will be a citizens' uprising over that issue. And then, okay, there will be new elections. And who is on the Israeli political horizon that is both a viable potential alternate prime minister and who represents a real political alternative? Nobody. Gantz and Eisenkot have both expressed themselves as being in favor of annexing at least parts of the West Bank. Yair Lapid would like to annex only Jerusalem. That's a non-starter for Palestinians. The two-state solution is not on anyone's agenda. The main function of talking about the necessity of the two-state solution is blocking thinking about other potential solutions, but they're not on anybody's agenda either. So it isn't clear that there is an easy path to something better. But, I'm typically pretty pessimistic on this issue, and unfortunately, I can't say that has been wrong. But people who I know and respect and spoke to just the other day in Israel said, we think that because the government, and more importantly, its entire approach to security in the Gaza Strip has been discredited, and because Netanyahu's political career may be over, there's going to be a broader space for progressive discourse. And that had already begun to happen before October 7th, because while the democracy protests originally wanted nothing to do with any discussion of the occupation, so people raising the slogan, "No democracy with occupation," were at first actually physically beaten up, and then gradually their numbers grew and expanded into the several thousands, and they were accepted as a presence, even though such people were typically not allowed to speak on the main platform of the demonstrations in Tel Aviv. So there was some breaking of the ice. But of course, this is a big setback. I mean, Israelis have rallied around the flag, and they won't easily forget what happened. And anybody who comes and says, well, we ought to make peace with the Palestinians, they're going to be laughed at for some time going forward.
Another question from David Moshfe. Pardon me if I'm slaughtering your name. Can you speak a little more about the attitude of the Palestinian Authority to all these events? They are, of course, rivals to Hamas, but they are also aware of how deeply unpopular they are in the population for working closely with Israel. Do you have a sense of what they are thinking and what scenarios they might be open to?
They're quaking in their boots, I think would be the easiest way to say it. There were demonstrations in Ramallah after the bombing of the hospital, and the policemen of the Palestinian Authority shot at demonstrators, at Palestinian demonstrators. So they know that they aren't popular. They know that they're seen as collaborators with Israel, which is true, they are. And Mahmoud Abbas is old. He's going to pass from the scene in the not too distant future, one way or the other. So there's already been some jockeying between various candidates. The United Arab Emirate likes one guy and Israel likes another guy. And then there are other potential claimants to the succession among Palestinians. So there's going to be lots of instability in the Palestinian Authority in the foreseeable future. If Israel was really clever, I don't believe they are, but if they were really clever, they would let Marwan Barghouti out of jail. Marwan Barghouti was in the early 2000s a relatively young leader of Fatah. He did lead the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which carried out suicide bombings and other attacks on Israeli civilians, and they caught him and threw him in jail for, I think, 5 life terms. So they have no plan to let him out. But until relatively recently, he was outspokenly in favor of 2 states, and he's willing to negotiate with the Israelis about it. So, he's the Nelson Mandela figure for Palestinians. So letting him out of jail would be a sign that, okay, we are willing to make a deal with the Palestinians. But of course, the Netanyahu government is not willing to make a deal with the Palestinians, and especially not the uber right-wing fascistic messianist elements in the government. They are absolutely not willing to make a deal. So that option, which might work, isn't really on the table.
Here's one from a name you're going to recognize, Linda Lopez Otero. She says, does Biden have any advisors on Israel-Palestine? Have they shown him a map? Where does he think these 2 states will exist? Pointing to the problems of West Bank and Gaza being separate and just the difficulties of the map.
So as I just said before, the function of saying that one is in favor of 2 states has become to block the possibility of talking about any other solution. The international community simply doesn't have another solution that is being actively discussed with any credibility. I don't think it's very likely at all that 2 states can be conjured up from the situation that is on the ground in Israel-Palestine now. The status today is that there is one sovereign government between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and that's the government of Israel. And half the people who it rules over in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and in a lesser way in East Jerusalem, have no say whatsoever in the formation of that government or its policies. This is why people have increasingly been using the term apartheid to describe the character of the regime, with all the problems that using that word entails. It's not unproblematic. Biden doesn't want to think about this. He didn't want this to happen. He was just thinking he'll say 2 states, 2 states, 2 states, and I love Israel, but I don't like Netanyahu so much, and that will be enough to get him reelected. And now this thing blew up in his face, but he still has nothing better to say. And nobody who's going to get in the same room with President Biden is going to be telling him two states is not a viable option. That's the price of admission to talk about Israel-Palestine, even not only in the White House, but in the upper reaches of the Democratic National Committee throughout the country. I mean, Chuck Schumer surely hasn't heard from anybody who told him that two states isn't a very likely outcome of the situation, or Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker of the House, or Hakeem Jeffries today. I mean, no, those people aren't having a realistic and serious discussion of what is going on in Israel-Palestine.
I know one question here is simply, is this webinar being recorded, and may we refer back to this and deepen our learning? Yes, it is being recorded. And what we do with all of our webinars is I'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who registered and or attended. First of all, with the link to the video so you can share it with others, but also links for additional reading. And I'll ask Joel to help me compile such a list. He's already sent me a lot of good suggestions. This looks like a good one to end on. Soraya Hamid says, thank you so much for being here. What actions do you recommend that attendees can take to promote safety and freedom? You were at a rally today speaking. That's one thing that people can do, is make their voices heard on this. I know Jewish Voice for Peace is circulating a petition to the president to call on a ceasefire and don't send weapons. They even ran a full-page ad in the New York Times yesterday. So what do we as activists do at this point?
So that's Soraya Hamida. She's a Portlander. Hi, Soraya.
Oh.
So the demonstration today, and similar demonstrations that both Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now have organized in Washington and in several localities around the country, called for a ceasefire and of killing of Palestinians and release of the hostages. Cori Bush has introduced a resolution into the House calling for those things. And there are a number of co-sponsors, mostly the usual suspects. And that resolution is not very likely to even be voted on the floor of the House. But it's a point of focus that people can organize around to try to lobby and pressure their representatives. That was the point of the demonstration today. It was outside the local Portland offices of Earl Blumenauer, who is one of the two Congress people that represent Portland. He's not a co-sponsor of that resolution and is kind of favor of two states and better treatment of the Palestinians, but trying not to do too much about it because he doesn't need to. He's long-term congressperson. He's been in office for over 2 decades. I don't remember exactly how many years, so he's not losing his seat unless he wants to. And Wyden, Senator Wyden, is totally hopeless. I mean, he's gung-ho, AIPAC, not movable on this question whatsoever. So we should petition our elected officials because that's what you're supposed to do. But they aren't going to move on this, I don't think. So that means that what we really need to be focusing on as much as we can is being in the streets and being as disruptive as we can. The demonstration that Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now conducted inside the building of Congress yesterday, at which some 300 people were arrested, was a very, very big deal. I mean, 300 Jews were arrested protesting the actions of the state of Israel. The more things like that happen, the more difficult it is for people like Biden and the Schumer and so forth to say that what they are doing is protecting Jews or any such thing. And of course, not only Jews should engage in such action, everybody should engage in such actions. It's also important that Palestinians raise their voices and tell their story and speak out. There was a very large rally on the campus of Portland State University today, which I had to miss because it was after the other demonstration that I spoke at, and I had already scheduled something else to do. But that's a good thing too, and the more the better. And one won't be enough, and two won't be enough. It needs to be built into a mass movement, ideally in coalition with similar mass movements of Native Americans and African Americans and other oppressed communities in this country, because the ultimate enemy of all of those communities is the same.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good place to leave this. Joel, I want to thank you so much again for taking your time, especially under the circumstances of having a lot of family stress and uncertainty to deal with. So it's been great to see you again. And I want to thank everyone who's attended tonight. Again, we've set a new record here for Other Voices webinar. So to all of you, stay active and informed, as Joel has been mentioning, and we'll be back next month. And I do watch for your follow-up email with the link for the video, an opportunity to subscribe to our newsletter, and lots more good information. Joel Beinin, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you, Paul. Anytime.
Okay. Good night, everyone.